And after years of living under our HOA's iron-fisted rule, they finally overstepped by hiking my fees simply because I had 3 cars parked in my own driveway. What they never suspected was that, quietly and meticulously, I had been acquiring nearly every property in the neighborhood for years, and now was the time to show Karen, our power-hungry HOA president who truly controlled this community, exactly who was in charge. Would she accept defeat gracefully when I revealed my secret? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. I never sought conflict with our HOA, yet when I discovered that brilliant, almost blinding, orange notice taped to my front door last Tuesday morning, I instantly recognized that war had been declared. My hands trembled as I read it. An immediate fee increase of $500 monthly, a violation for having excessive vehicles on the property. 3 cars, they claimed. That was all they cared about. They overlooked the fact that the 3 vehicles in question were entirely ordinary. My rugged work truck, essential for my construction business, my wife Jessica's dependable SUV used for her hospital shifts, and the gently used Honda we purchased to celebrate our daughter's sweet 16 just last month. There they were, 3 perfectly normal cars parked right in our driveway. I peered out from my kitchen window as Karen, yes, Karen, made her customary morning rounds. Dressed smartly and armed with a little pink clipboard and a measuring tape, she stopped at my driveway, pulled out her phone, and snapped a fresh series of pictures. This was the 3rd time that week she'd taken it upon herself to document my property. "Honey, she's at it again," Jessica called from the living room. "Maybe we should just shove the Honda into the garage," I replied firmly, pouring my coffee. "We're not concealing our daughter's car as if we've done something wrong. Our garage is completely occupied with your medical supplies and my work equipment, exactly as we explained at the last HOA meeting." I couldn't shake the memory of Karen's smirk when I'd tried to explain our situation. "Rules are rules, Mr. Bennett," she had said without even looking up from her phone. "Maybe if you couldn't afford proper garage storage, this neighborhood wouldn't be for you." What none of them realized, however, was that I had been quietly buying up properties in our subdivision for the past 5 years through my real estate investment firm, Aurora Estates. Each time a house went on the market, I used a different LLC name for the purchase. What began as a shrewd investment strategy had evolved into something much larger, something that would soon upend the very foundation of this oppressive regime. I deliberately strolled outside to fetch the mail, moving slowly as if to savor every moment. I noticed Karen feigning interest in inspecting Mrs. Wallace's rose bushes from the corner of her eye. Poor Mrs. Wallace had been fined just last month because her roses were deemed too vibrant and accused of disturbing the neighborhood's carefully curated color harmony. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Property closing complete. I now owned 67% of the subdivision. A small, satisfied smile tugged at my lips as I tucked the phone away, just as Karen power walked over, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Mr. Bennett," she cooed in a saccharine tone, "I trust you received our notice about the vehicle violation?" "Okay, I'm sorry, but before we continue with the story, I want to ask for a small favor. We're so damn close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. It's my dream to reach this goal, and I hope you can help me to make this happen. Now back to the story." "I did, Karen," I replied evenly. "I have a few questions about the legal basis for this fee increase." She waved her hand dismissively. "The board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd understand how these things work." Her smile never reached her eyes, oblivious to the fact that I had attended every single meeting for the past 5 years through proxy representatives who owned the other homes. I had quietly documented every one of Karen's selective enforcements, every questionable fee, every abuse of power. As she spun on her designer heels and clicked down the sidewalk, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and the board is calling an emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m. sharp, to discuss additional measures for so-called problem properties." I watched her depart and then pulled out my phone once more to text my lawyer. Asterisk time to prepare those documents. Karen's making her move tonight. Just then, my daughter's car rolled into the driveway, and I noticed Karen pausing to snap a few more pictures. My blood boiled, yet I maintained my composure. Tonight would change everything in this neighborhood. But first, I had a series of important calls to make. Returning inside, I spread out the detailed property maps across my desk. Each lot was carefully highlighted and coded, a record of 5 years' worth of planning and a testament to the evidence I had been gathering of Karen's reign of HOA terror. Moments later, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Wallace from across the street, her voice trembling as she recounted receiving yet another violation notice. As I listened to her, I glanced up at the framed photograph on my wall. My father, standing proud in front of his first house, taken before an HOA's harassment had forced him to sell at a loss 2 decades ago. My father had always taught me to play the long game, to fight smart rather than with blind anger. Glancing at my watch, I noted that there were exactly 6 hours until the emergency meeting. Karen believed she was going to play hardball over a few cars in a driveway. She had no idea what was coming. I entered the community center's meeting room and immediately felt the tension in the air. Every seat was filled with neighbors I had known for years, now sitting shoulder to shoulder and whispering among themselves. Karen had truly outdone herself this time. She had even hired a professional photographer to capture my driveway from multiple angles, making my 3 normal cars appear to be part of an illicit used car lot. "Let's begin," Karen announced, tapping her sparkly pink gavel on the podium. She had called this emergency meeting on a Tuesday evening, fully aware that most working families would struggle to attend. But I had ensured my presence. Quietly settling in the back row, I watched as she launched into her well-practiced show. "As you can see from these professional photographs," she began, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation, "Mr. Bennett's property has now turned into a used car lot." A few of her loyal supporters in the front row gasped, the very same individuals who had left their Christmas decorations up until March without fear of fines. Scanning the room, I noticed Mrs. Alvarez rolling her eyes. She had been fined just last month for allowing her grandson to park his car in her driveway while he assisted with her roof repairs. Meanwhile, Mr. Wong, the high school science teacher, was scribbling notes furiously. He had himself received a violation notice for having his car slightly beyond his driveway line during the last snowstorm. Karen then advanced to the next slide, a zoomed-in image of my daughter's car. "This vehicle," she declared, "has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. What she conveniently omitted was that my daughter was home from college for the weekend. The meeting dragged on as Karen continued her presentation, showing charts that purported to display property value decreases, anonymous complaints from neighbors, likely her friends, and even weather reports insinuating that my cars were responsible for creating excessive snowdrifts on the street. She proceeded to pull out a thick binder. "I've documented every instance of vehicles entering and leaving Mr. Bennett's property over the past 3 months, she proclaimed. My eyebrows shot up in disbelief. She had been tracking my family's movements. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That's when Linda Stevens, my next-door neighbor, stood up and challenged her. "Karen, isn't this a bit excessive? They're simply regular cars in a regular driveway." Karen's face reddened as she snapped back. "You're out of order. You haven't been recognized by the chair." I watched as Karen's husband, Garrett, began passing out copies of a newly proposed bylaw, one that would limit each household to 2 vehicles and require that all cars be parked in a garage. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh. "We will now vote on the new vehicle restrictions and fee increase," Karen declared without affording any discussion. That was my cue. Slowly rising to my feet, I straightened my tie and invoked a point of order. "Madam President," I began, my voice calm but firm, "before we vote, I believe it is essential to review the current property ownership structure of our HOA." Karen's eyes narrowed as she peered at me over her reading glasses. "You're not recognized, Mr. Bennett," she retorted. Undeterred, I produced my own folder and cited the relevant HOA bylaw section that allowed any property owner to raise a point of order regarding voting procedures. The room fell into a heavy silence. I walked purposefully toward the front of the room, my shoes clicking on the polished floor, and unfurled a large property map. Over the past 5 years, my company, Aurora Estates, has been acquiring homes in this very development. Perhaps it would interest everyone to know precisely who now owns the majority of this HOA. I paused, making deliberate eye contact with each board member before adding, and perhaps we should also discuss those questionable surveillance activities you've been conducting. A murmur rose from the audience as I spoke. I could see several neighbors pulling out their phones to record every moment. Karen's perfectly manicured nails gripped the podium tighter as she reached for her water bottle, only to accidentally knock over her cherished gavel. At that moment, Garrett hurried to the podium, whispering urgently in her ear. Her eyes widened in alarm as the realization dawned on her. She had been dealing with someone far more formidable than she had ever imagined. The room was silent as I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and then opened my leather briefcase. "Before we proceed with the vote on these new fees," I announced, "I have something very important to share with everyone." Methodically, I removed a thick stack of property deeds from the case and laid them out on the table, each paper representing a critical piece of my secret plan that had been assembling over the past 5 years. The room buzzed with whispers as I arranged the deeds in neat rows. "Over the years," I continued, "I have watched this HOA board ignore serious maintenance issues while harassing good neighbors over trivial matters. I have seen Karen write up Mrs. Wallace, an 82-year-old, for having a flower pot that was just 1 inch too tall, while her friend Susan's bright purple fence never even received a warning." Karen's face turned a deeper shade of red as she attempted to retort. "I enforce all rules fairly." In her haste, her hand trembled so much while reaching for her water bottle that she spilled a small amount on her designer blouse. I then pulled up a series of photographs on the meeting room's large screen. "Here," I said, "is clear security footage from last Tuesday, showing Karen measuring my grass at 3 a.m. A collective gasp echoed through the room as the images played. In another instance, she had been caught blatantly ignoring our family's violation immediately after we had hired her son's landscaping company. More murmurs of discontent rippled through the audience. "But perhaps the most significant revelation is this," I continued. "Through my company, Aurora Estates, I now own 67% of the homes in this development, which effectively makes me the majority owner of the HOA itself." At that, Karen jumped up abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You can't do that! It's not allowed!" she shrieked, her voice tinged with panic. I smiled calmly and replied, "Actually, I can. I've had 3 different law firms review everything. It's completely legal." I then produced another folder containing signed complaints from 32 residents documenting harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees. The room erupted in a cacophony of voices as Mrs. Wallace stood up, her voice quivering with emotion. "Last winter, I was fined $200 for not shoveling my walkway quickly enough. I was in the hospital with pneumonia." Others joined in, recounting similar grievances. Karen desperately tried to restore order by banging her gavel, but nobody was listening anymore. Seizing the moment, I proposed that we dissolve the current board and hold new elections with strict term limits and transparent rules about conflicts of interest. No more 3 a.m. grass measurements. No more selective enforcement. At that moment, Charles Monroe from 2 doors down raised his hand in support. Soon, hands were raised all around the room. Realizing that her authority was collapsing, Karen snatched her designer purse and started toward the door. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I maintained my composure as I responded, "According to HOA Bylaws Section 73, a majority vote is required to adjourn, and I don't believe you have that majority anymore." I gestured toward the spread-out deeds on the table. "We're just getting started." Karen froze, her hand still on the doorknob, as she realized that her once unchallenged power was slipping away. 20 years of ruling this neighborhood with an iron fist were drawing to a close. I then opened another folder and shifted the focus. Let's talk about those mysterious pool renovation fees from last summer. The ones where $50,000 disappeared, yet the pool was never fixed. I have some very interesting bank records to share. Karen slumped against the wall, her face draining of color. Unbeknownst to her, a local news van had just pulled into the parking lot, an invitation I had extended for coverage of our community reorganization meeting. The next few hours promised to change our neighborhood forever, as I was about to expose years of Karen's secrets, each corroborated by a single, irrefutable receipt. Later that Monday, I walked into my lawyer's office only to find 20 furious voicemails from Karen. Over the weekend, she had discovered my company's property records and was threatening to sue me for secretly planning to take over the neighborhood. I couldn't help but smile as I listened. She had finally revealed her true colors, but Karen's anger was mixed with palpable fear. That very evening, she went door to door, spreading wild rumors that I was planning to transform our peaceful suburb into a parking lot for my car collection. Some neighbors even believed her, especially after she presented them with bogus documents implying that I had shady ties to an unscrupulous development company. The following day, my security cameras caught Karen skulking onto my property at midnight, snapping close-up photos of my car license plates. The next morning, she filed a lawsuit, accusing me of breaking HOA rules by purchasing properties through my company. She even attempted to secure an emergency court order to freeze my voting rights within the HOA. It was then that months of careful planning truly paid off. My lawyer unveiled our secret weapon, a detailed record of every HOA meeting over the past 5 years. We possessed video evidence of Karen granting her friends passes on their violations, while ruthlessly fining others. Copies of checks showing that she had used HOA funds to renovate her own backyard, and emails in which she boasted about using her authority to keep undesirable elements out of our neighborhood. With each new piece of evidence, the judge's eyes grew wider. Karen's face turned beet red when we played time-stamped footage of her measuring my lawn with a ruler at 3 a.m., taking photos of my daughter's car, and posting threatening notes on neighbors' doors. Her lawyer began sweating profusely when we presented proof that she had altered HOA records to conceal her friends' unpaid dues. The real shock, however, came when 3 former board members stepped forward to testify about how Karen had bullied them into approving unjust rules, admitted to targeting specific homeowners she personally disliked, and even confessed to funneling HOA fines to pay for her annual trips to Hawaii. The courtroom fell eerily silent when we displayed Karen's social media posts mocking elderly residents who couldn't pay their fees. In one post, she lounged poolside in Maui with the caption, "Thanks to all my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this vacation. Keep those violations coming." Karen tried desperately to defend herself, insisting she was merely doing her job. But then we played a recording from last month's HOA meeting in which she screamed at Mrs. Wallace, a 75-year-old neighbor, for having a bird feeder that was an inch too low. At that moment, Karen lost it. She leapt to her feet, pointing an accusing finger at me. "He's trying to destroy our perfect neighborhood!" she shouted. "Do you have any idea what kind of people will move in if we don't enforce strict rules? He probably wants to turn this into a community where people can park wherever they please." The judge had heard enough. Not only was Karen's lawsuit dismissed, but he also ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. As we left the courthouse, my phone buzzed with texts from neighbors, all of whom had received a mass email from Karen announcing her immediate resignation from the board, claiming she was being forced out by big money interests. I watched as she stormed toward her car, furiously typing on her phone. Although Karen still retained a band of loyal followers in the neighborhood and was not the type to admit defeat easily, I now had all the proof I needed to demonstrate that our HOA president had abused her power for far too long, and the legal authority to make genuine changes. On the morning of the final court hearing, Karen made one last desperate move by sending an army of news vans to my house, thinking that public pressure might force me to back down. Instead, I straightened my tie, gathered my documents, and confidently approached the reporters. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Mr. Bennett, and I'd like to share something very interesting about our HOA's financial records." I then unveiled a series of color-coded spreadsheets prepared by my accountant, which laid bare years of suspicious fees that always seemed to funnel directly into projects benefiting Karen's closest cronies. One reporter gasped when I played security footage of Karen measuring my lawn at 3:00 a.m., even though her own yard flagrantly violated every rule on record. Inside the courthouse, Karen sat alongside her expensive lawyer, her signature fake pearl necklace glinting as she maintained a smug smile. That smile quickly faded when our lawyer began presenting the evidence. Photos of Karen's own house in violation of multiple rules, including her garishly bright purple mailbox, her overgrown garden, and her son's 4 cars haphazardly parked on the street. The judge leaned forward as we revealed the existence of Karen's secret Facebook group, where she openly boasted about targeting certain families. "Let's see how long the Bennetts last with these new fees," she had written in a post. Karen jumped to her feet to object, but then we played the recording from last week's pool party, in which her voice rang out clearly. "Of course I make up violations. How else can we maintain control over who lives here?" The judge's gavel fell decisively. Not only was Karen immediately removed from the HOA board, but she was also ordered to refund every unfair fee she had collected. The look on her face when she learned that the total came to $1,478.92 was a satisfaction beyond any personal revenge I could have imagined. Using my majority ownership, I established a new HOA board composed of 5 residents from across the neighborhood, including Mrs. Alvarez, whom Karen had once tried to target for cooking ethnic food, and Mr. Lee, whose beautiful garden Karen had disparagingly labeled as too exotic. The changes came swiftly. Children were finally allowed to play basketball in their driveways. Gardens transformed from mere ornamental patches into spaces for growing vegetables. And families were granted the freedom to park more than 2 cars, as long as they fit within their own property boundaries. 3 weeks later, I watched from my window as Karen's moving truck pulled up. In a final farewell, she had sent a letter to everyone, claiming she was relocating to a better neighborhood with higher standards. No one seemed to notice the new HOA parking ticket plastered to her windshield as she drove away. That same evening, my daughter parked her car right next to my work truck and Jessica's SUV, and I hung a small sign that we had all voted on. "Welcome to Bennett Hills, where good neighbors make good neighborhoods." The very next morning, I received an unexpected call from a TV producer who had seen the news coverage and wanted to make a documentary about our transformation of the HOA. As I looked out at children playing freely in their yards and neighbors chatting amiably over garden fences, I couldn't help but smile, imagining Karen watching from her new house, now burdened with a strict 1-car garage rule. And the best part? Our property values had surged by 15% in the very first month after Karen's departure. It turns out people truly do prefer living in a neighborhood where they are treated with respect rather than ruled by fear. Even some of Karen's old friends stopped by to apologize, admitting they had been too scared of becoming her next target. "We still have an HOA, but now it serves to protect the neighborhood rather than simply policing it. Every month, the fees are allocated to improvements that really matter: upgrading the playground, fixing the pool, and helping elderly residents maintain their homes. We even started a community garden in the very spot where Karen once used to take her yard violation photos." As I filed away the last of the court documents, my phone buzzed with a text from Karen's new neighborhood watch group, asking for advice on how to deal with their own power-hungry HOA president. I leaned back in my chair and smiled, realizing that sometimes the best revenge isn't about retribution at all. It's about showing others how to stand up for themselves.